Chapter 13, 1 Corinthians. Chocolate chip cookie dough has been a problem in my life. Not so much lately, but when we were newlyweds, so I'm sure it was my wife's fault, except that it started in college with me before I met her, would make double batches of Toll House cookie dough with the good dark chocolate semi-sweet chips, just saying. Double batches, okay, big old huge bowl. And what I couldn't eat, we would put in logs and wrap them up in cellophane and freeze them for the next time out. Didn't really bother with baking powder because never cooked them. It was just eating the dough, okay? And massive amounts of it at that. But something interesting happened one time. Leaving out the baking powder, not a problem. But I forgot one time to put salt in. And it's not much. It was like a quarter of a teaspoon, something like that. Okay, those of you who have done it know because you've already got to. Now, usually, I'm sorry, butter and chocolate chips and brown sugar. Now, how do you go wrong? Well, you can't go wrong with just this dark chocolate semi-sweet. You can't go wrong. But it was all wrong. I took one scoop and just because I forgot just one little thing. And it was a little thing too, but wow. That salt that adds the savor in that case, that brings out the flavoring of whatever is there. Do you as an individual, and do we collectively, do we have all the ingredients, okay, working that we need, that we're supposed to have? We were told at the end of chapter last, we can remember there weren't any chapter breaks. So you need to do your best to kind of rip those dark black numbers out of there, especially the big ones. Just kind of set them aside if you can. He talked about the single source for the spiritual gifts. He talked about the one body, the unity. He talked about the diversity. Everybody gets at least one gift and nobody gets them all. And the body's integrally related to one another. There's no way around it. And then he said, I'm going to show you the most excellent way, is the way he finished off, which means beyond compare, literally. It means the way beyond comparison. There's nothing else even in its league. And this is all as far as a discussion, remember, on spirituals, literally, on spiritual things, spiritual gifts specifically. So verse 1, this most excellent way beyond compare. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but have not love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, okay, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. That's probably not referring to burning. We'll talk about that in a minute. But have not love, I gain nothing. So first, he's going to talk about sound and fury. Now, that's a reference, of course, if you're, I don't want to hear I don't want to get any cards and letters from Shakespearean, hardcores. It's from Macbeth, it's from Scene 5, and it's describing, it says, life is a tale told by an idiot, okay? Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Now, that's not the whole quote, so I don't want to hear about it. For our purposes this morning, that's all we're using. So that's what the sound and fury is about. Now, remember how in the spiritual gift list, we've had two of them really in chapter 12 already, and they didn't match. But one of the things that matched was the tongues, speaking in tongues, was last. It's almost like this add-on. And almost guaranteed that's because it was not an add-on for the church in Corinth. Now, this is not saying that, I am not trying to say that there's no legitimate use. He says here, he talks about tongues of men and angels. We don't know for sure and precisely, but it seems quite likely he's referring not only to a human language of people, okay, that you have not learned prior, but it's also talking about this language of angels, which we'll get into in chapter 14 as well, that there's something other that is not intelligible, not a known language that seems to be, a personal, like, worship language. We know, all of us know, I think, that it can get out of hand. It can be misused. That's no reason to simply say, oh, doesn't exist. I want to throw out one thing before we move on that I see as a potentially legit use. And this is firsthand from these folks, good friends of ours. We're back in North Carolina. And they were at a meeting. A lady had joined their group. It was a home group. And she was married to a gentleman from Mexico. They had recently moved to North Carolina from Mexico. And he just didn't, he had less English than I have Spanish. And that's pathetic. Okay. Just enough to be peligroso, dangerous. That's me. Okay. That's how much Spanish I speak. He had very, very little. So they're at this meeting. They pray together, and Jose was the name, and he's just lost. He's just lost in the whole thing. And after they finish praying, Jose comes up to my friend and says, thank you so much. Thank you so much for praying in my language, because I really needed it. I needed to hear. Okay, Ian, you just spoke about the heart language. He needed to hear some familiar things and some building up in Christ in his heart language. One thing, though, our friend doesn't speak Spanish. Okay. So is that a legitimate use? Is that an occurrence of tongues? Because if you go back in Acts, primarily in the book of Acts, whenever tongues are exhibited in people, it's when there's a brand new work happening. Okay, it's when things started off on the day of Pentecost. It's when the half-breeds, the icky Samaritans, when the Gentiles, when they found out, they're accepted in too. Now, they've been told that, but okay, it was something that showed that God was working among them. So I don't want to make too much of that. That's as far as we're going with it for now, especially for Dave. But he's saying, I speak in tongues of men and angels, and then he goes on, because he's talking about gifts here primarily, these spiritual gifts. But I don't have love. All I'm doing is making noise. And the term, the second term, the clanging cymbal, that was something they would have been familiar with from pagan worship at some of the pagan temples in Corinth. Specifically, that was part of their worship time. And he says, that's all I am. I'm just making, it's like I'm making pagan noise if I do this but don't have love. If I have the gift of prophecy, which he's going to go on, remember, when we get to chapter 14, it's like, this is the real stuff. You want to talk about something that's important. Forget the tongues. He just lob that out. He doesn't say it's sin or anything. He just says that there's something more important. But he says, hey, I've got the gift of prophecy, and I can fathom all mysteries, okay, mysterion, those things that you can't figure out with your five senses. And knowledge. Remember, they loved their knowledge, okay? They were all about knowledge and wisdom, okay? We know stuff, and because we know stuff, you should listen to us. You would believe the PhDs I got hanging on the wall, and so you should listen to me. Says, no. Says, and these are all inclusive. This is exhaustive. It says all mysteries, all knowledge. Okay, there's nothing that's left out. It's hypothetically saying, if I did, remember last week when we said you can't have it all? I mean, it's very clear at the end of chapter 12, spiritually, gift-wise, nobody gets them all. But in life, we don't get it all. Well, he's saying, what if I did have it all? If I didn't have love, wouldn't amount to much. Oh, and a faith that can move mountains. And this is not saving faith. This is not the trust that we placed in the shed blood of Jesus. This is the spiritual gift. Okay, remember the cable car from last week? Okay, when the cable car clamps onto the cable, when the trolley car, that's when it's energized. Without being clamped onto the cable, it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, this is not saving faith. This is something very specific and supercharged that the Holy Spirit gives some people to just see beyond current circumstances and say, no, this is going to happen. How do you know that? I don't know. I'm telling you, it's going to happen, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But I have not love, I am nothing. And it means that. It means non-existent is the word he uses. It's like, it's just as if I never was. It's less than, it's not that much. He goes on and moves to something different here. These aren't gifts. In verse 3, it says, if I give all I possess to the poor, literally says, I parcel it out. Everything I've got, I parcel it out. and surrender my body to the flames. We're not going to pursue this. Really the more likely translation here is it has to do with boasting. And it's boasting in a positive sense. But what he's talking about is giving his body over totally so that there can be boasting in God and in God's word. But even if you take it as giving the body to the flames, think of it in terms of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. It's like the ultimate sacrifice. But have not love, I gain nothing. Okay, so of course, you're probably thinking, oh, yeah, gifts and personal sacrifice, strings of all of them. Well, there's the missing ingredient. Okay, these are good things. These are worthwhile things when God's using them and when they're submitted to God's purposes. But without love, it's useless. It is worthless. In fact, maybe even worse. It's just sound and fury, signifying nothing. Okay, apart from me, you can do nothing, Jesus told us. So, the magic ingredient, the missing ingredient, no matter how good those, the chocolate chips are awesome. Brown sugar rocks. Okay, butter, butter's the best. But you leave out love. It says it's useless. Useless. And remember, this isn't a discussion of its own. This falls smack in the middle of talking about these spiritual gifts. It's like you're distracted. You're looking at the wrong stuff. You're getting all pumped up because we have the gift. And he's already told us there is no the gift. We want to talk about the one thing that you have to have. Well, that would be love. And of course, this is agape. This is our namesake, the namesake of the coffee house, the namesake of the church, namesake of maybe a church. I don't have the spiritual gift of faith. Okay? But some folks can see it over there already. There's not just a parking lot. There's actually something bigger. Agape. We do not have time today to go into it. I would encourage you to follow up with C.S. Lewis's The Four Loves. He was quite a classical Greek scholar, okay, in his own right. That isn't what he was the professor of, but a worthwhile study with, in brief, eros, okay, erotic love, more physically and sensually, not sexually necessarily, but sensually connected. Phileo, the brotherly love, common affection, family attachment, that sort of thing, which is used for a good, wholesome kind of love scripturally in the New Testament. Storge, which is almost non-existent, we have just one negative usage of it in the New Testament. And that's talking about the last days and the godlessness, when it says without natural affection or without common love. It's what C.S. Lewis called duck love. Storge was, because it's the love for fuzzy little things, the natural affection that you should have for baby stuff. And that someone who, I'm not a cat lover, but you know what? Kittens are still warm and fuzzy and they're cute. Okay? Just like baby quail and baby anything. But then there was agape. And agape really was not commonly used in classical Greek, in ancient Greek. But the roots of it were that it's an act of the will. It's not because, oh, it's a cute fuzzy thing, or because, hey, you're my brother. You know, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'll punch you, but yeah, I love you. You know, or wow, my wife is, wow, eros. Okay? In its place, it's okay. But this is an act of will. That's what's behind it. And of course, the Christians 2,000 years ago, they pretty much, I mean, we own this word now. Never let anybody take it away from you. Or rainbows, or a lot of other things. Don't let them steal your good stuff. Agape. Okay? It's a verb. In fact, that's kind of a catchphrase for the coffee house, or was at one point. Okay? Agape, where love is a verb. It's an action word. And we have utilized in some of our stuff before with Agape Bible Church, where love is an action, not a feeling. It's an act of the will. But it is for the good of others. That's the key, and that's why it describes God's love so well. So, what does it do? The first, we've got two things it does, and then we've got a list of what it doesn't do, okay? And then we have another longer list of what it does. First off, you've got this point counterpoint almost with love is patient. Agape is patient. It is kind. Patient, the word that's used for it literally, and this is where you have to be careful about just trying to jump into a language and say, oh, this is a compound word. So you put these two words together and here's what it means. It means long rage. It's a compound word. It's like big, macrothumia. Macro is in like macroeconomics. It's the big view. It's the high view, the 30,000 foot. You see the international implications, blah, blah, blah. So it's long, but what it means is it holds on to that. It doesn't release the anger. So it's a long suffering. That's one of the reasons why they sometimes used to translate it long suffering. It's long anger. Well, why is it long? Because you're not turning it loose and letting it rip somebody else to shreds. Okay, so that's why it's patience. And so that's kind of the one side of it, is that it is good. It suffers long. It hangs in there. But then the love is kind. The idea behind that word is primarily that you could hurt, but you don't. One is a positive thing, which really is, because it's like, no, you don't. You're patient. You don't just fly off the handle. But with kindness, the term has to do with, I heard it described one time as if you had a baby bird in your hand, you have the capability to just go, switch, voila, baby bird. But you don't. Why? It's kindness. It's a control that comes. You could harm, but you don't. It doesn't envy. Okay. Now the word, now your song, after practicing it this week, now the song, starts to come back. Get into the negative part of it, if you could call it that. It doesn't envy, which has to do with burning with jealousy. Zealot. We get our word zealot from the root word. It doesn't boast. Okay. It's not proud. The boasting, it's okay. We have a good handle on most of these. They're good translations in English. Again, if you think about these things, why are they not done? Love doesn't do them because they are not a benefit to someone else. They are pretty much about me. If it's self-absorption, self-focus, then love doesn't do that. It doesn't go there. Agape does not go there. Not proud. It's not rude. Now this is idea which linked with boasting. It's a related word, but it has to do with this idea of just treating others badly. That's where the boasting aspect of it comes in, because it's about me and it's at your cost. It's been said, oh, you're not bragging if it's true. Self-absorbed bragging is self-absorbed bragging. But in this case, it has to do with being rude, and it's the same word that was used back in chapter 7. If anyone thinks he is acting improperly, anyone thinks he is being rude toward the virgin he's engaged to, and if she's getting along in years, oh, ouch. Speaking of rude, that's the first thing that hit me about this. Like, gosh, Paul. Anyway, the same word that's used there. It's like that's not the nice way to deal with this. Okay, this isn't constructive. Okay? And that's what we're supposed to be. And it's used also in chapter 5 when it talks about the fact that y'all are proud about the sin that you're allowing, to be in your midst. That's not acting properly. You're not doing that. He says love does. Not self-seeking. Okay? We can understand that one simply enough, can't we? Not easily angered. keeps no record of wrongs. Those two are good, particularly handy for marriage. They're handy for all of life, but, oh, come on. Yeah, you've heard it. Do you remember what you did 1989, July 2nd? Ooh. Actually, no. Oh, and then it's going to be worse. All of us have done it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? There needs to be resolution. I'm not talking about just burying stuff, okay, sweeping it under the rug and saying, la, 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 it'll go away. No. But once resolution is reached, let it go. Along with that, of course, is the easily angered, the hair trigger. No hair triggering. Okay. Where you know what this is like. You know what it's like to be around someone like this. And again, when you've been married, and the longer you're married, the easier it is because it's like, oh yeah, because you know how to trigger one another. And I'm not talking about snowflake trigger. I'm talking about really trigger, like, I must take your liver out now. That kind of triggered. And that you can do it as a spouse after a few decades. You can do that with a spouse in the right circumstances by simply going, wait, did you just go, yeah. Okay. Triggered. Okay. He says, don't be a snowflake. Do not be easily angered. And you've done it before too. I know you have. I have. And you can tell, you go out and you go out to do your business, you go out to do your work, you go out to do life, and just give me the chance, pal. That's right. Am I just waiting for someone to cut me off on the highway and flip me the bird? So in righteous indignation, I can flare. Oh. I wish I could say but obviously I have. It's not a hypothetical situation. Okay? He says, no. And this is not just good intentions. Remember, this is the work of the Spirit. This is not love. Keep in mind, love, and then when we get to the end here, which we'll be here very shortly, okay, faith, hope, love, those are not gifts of the Spirit. Those are fruit. Those are part of the godly character that God builds into the lives of his people. Okay, for everybody they're intended. But with God's power and his transforming us and reworking us, remodeling us from the inside out, these things are possible. He says, don't do it. Don't do it. And one more stab at this idea of the rudeness, the self-seeking. Okay, you will remember, I know, back in chapter 8, it says, we know that we all, when he got to start talking about food sacrificed to idols, he says, we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up. Remember, the word literally means inflate. But love builds up. Go with the one, not with the other. Okay? It's not about my rights even. It's about what is good and proper and will benefit the other. Now, back to what it does. What agape does. Oh, first of all, I'm sorry, number 6. In verse 6 is the last of the negatives, if you could call it that. It does not delight in evil. And the word has to do with covering. And it doesn't mean that we cover up. It's not like, an accessory to the crime. It has to do with, instead of exposing and saying, hey, look at here. Look at what so-and-so did. Okay, because it has to do with someone else. It has to do with, what's really inferred is that some of these, that we're happy when someone else fails. that we actually rejoice when someone else takes a nosedive. Not that we would actually say that, but underneath in our heart, it's, oh, did she deserve that? Oh, Lord, you know she did. Yeah, maybe. Guess who else deserves a whole lot that I don't get? Not to get personal or anything, okay? But it's behind that. The idea, this is a different word that's used in this passage, but it carries some of the same connotation. Remember this last verse in James, Jacob, the book. Remember this, whoever turns a sinner from the error of his way will save him from death and cover over a multitude of sins. It carries that kind of idea. Okay, here at the beginning of verse 6. Not delighting in evil. Not being happy when someone else falls apart. We want to be part of putting things back together. Not dancing on someone's grave. So moving on, rejoices with the truth. Always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. We're not going to spend much time on those. The protection is just that. It is a covering in a positive sense and keeping others from harm no matter what. Always trusts can mean it's not suspicious all the time because it just says it lacks faith. Okay, it's pistis. It's faith, belief, trust. Same word. It says, but it always has faith. It always believes. And it doesn't mean that we have to just stand and let someone punch us repeatedly in the nose. Okay, we don't have to ignore it. But it does mean that we aren't looking over our shoulder all the time for somebody who we believe or are suspicious of that they're going to come punch us in the nose. So that basically love thinks the best. We want to think the best of someone. Always hopes. Okay, it's looking to the future, understanding a good conclusion. Always perseveres. It hangs in there. Hupomeno. It dwells under. It stays put. It's solid. It's not going anywhere. It's not looking for an excuse to, oh, I'm not feeling very fulfilled. You haven't met all my needs. You haven't met all my needs? I've heard this before in counseling before. Okay, we're not talking about just marriages. I'm talking about relationships. You haven't met all my needs? Good luck. There's no such. God Almighty is the only one that will ever meet all your needs. The rest of us, we were never designed for that. Awesome as you may be, you were not designed for that. It hangs in there. It says, you know what? We're not home yet. We're not with Jesus. I'm not perfected yet. Neither are you. This process is not completed. And so I, being faulty as I am, can accept and hang in there with you being faulty as you are. And that's what a church body, that's what it takes. Otherwise, if you want to be critical about folks, it takes you that long. It doesn't even take that long to say, you know what? They're obnoxious. They have, C.S. Lewis talked about, they've got squeaky shoes. They've got greasy hair. I know this gal's a notorious card player, card shark. It's just, we can find something, we can find anything. And guess what? If folks are watching us for very long, we'll do the same. It just doesn't take long. So it says, God says, love doesn't do that. Okay? We are imperfect yet at that. So we hang in there. We stick with it. No wonder. That's from last week. That's not supposed to be in there. It's a great passage. But I left a couple of these in here. Bad tech work. All right. Yes. I was looking at it saying, what? What is that? Verse 8, love never fails. It never comes up short. Agape, God's love, in the power of the Holy Spirit, it's it. I mean, this is the ingredient. That's why all these other things, it's like, I'm just noise, sound and fury. I'm just making noise, just kicking up dust, signifying nothing without love. It never fails, and it has to do with running out. It never comes to an end. It never comes up short. But it also doesn't run out, time-wise. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Now he's going to start with this list again, and he's big on prophecy and speaking God's truth into the situation. Because he said, well, basically, this is kid stuff in the end. Prophecy is important, you bet. But where there are prophecies, they'll cease. When there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when perfection comes, when things are brought to a good conclusion, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. It says it's kid stuff. And we expect kids to behave like kids. But not so much when we're an adult and we're acting like a kid. And he's saying these things they're for here and now, but when we get home, they won't be needed. It's not that they're bad, they just won't be needed anymore. We won't need to speak God's truth into a situation because there won't be any sin. We'll be living in God's land. We will be in His presence. So don't need prophecies. Tongues, tongues were a sign of what God was doing amongst different people groups. They're means of edifying folks through prayer language. We're going to grant a couple of these things. Okay, he's saying whatever they were, they're not going to be necessary because there won't be any more language barrier for one thing in heaven. It just won't be necessary. And knowledge. I can see it now. All of us celebrating in the presence of the living, almighty, eternal, immortal, all-knowing God, comparing notes on how much we know. I don't think so. It'd be more like, Lord, how did you do that? How did you form the Milky Way? Could we get a rewind on that? It's like knowledge. No, bye. For we know in part, we prophesy in part. When perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. No more kid stuff. He says this is for now. Don't get hung up on it because it's not the most important thing. Because they thought, remember, realized eschatology. These people thought that they had kind of arrived. They were just waiting around for Jesus to show up, and not much was going to change. You're thinking, remember back in chapter 4? Already, y'all, you have all you want. Already you've become rich. You become kings, and that without us. And then he goes on to say, I wish you had become kings, but they were behaving in this way. That's why in chapter 7, when we got there, they were having some issues with marriage, with folks who were married, and they were saying, evidently, well, we really don't need to have, sexual intimacy anymore because, and one of the best explanations is that, well, Jesus said the angels, they weren't given in marriage. You think, yeah, but you ain't there yet, and you ain't angels. And we're never going to be angels. We're a different creature. And then last week, remember, there were those who had spiritual superiority complexes. Remember? No inferiority complexes. No saying, oh, the body doesn't need me. No superiority complexes, which back in verse 21 is where he started. I can't say to the hand, I don't need you. You know why? Because I have the gift. Woohoo! It's like, no. You haven't arrived. You have not arrived. This is kid stuff. You need to grow up and realize that You're overemphasizing the wrong things. Because someday, we're going to be home. Verse 12. Now we see a poor reflection in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And the emphasis is on being known. It's not what I know. It's not on my knowledge. It's not on that Hebrew idea of dagat, which was used even of physical intimacy between husband and wife, to know at that level. It's like, no. No, that's in part. It's being known. The whole thing is about being known. That's the real goal. That's the real beauty of this. But they did, Corinth was pretty famous for their bronze mirrors. And they were high polished, they were high quality, but not like our mirrors. Okay, with the, silver backing with the glass, you can get pretty sharp images. These images, they were so-so. He says, that's like it is now. He says, all the best that we experience, even in our time together in worship, the best that we experience, it's just a so-so reflection. It's a little taste, that was good, and it's gone. But someday, no, he says, face to face. Reminder of a reference to this kind of thing back in Numbers 12 with Moses. This is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. It's like that's going to be what we are. It's going to be where we are. It's going to be what we're about. Because the importance of being known. Back in chapter 8, 1 Corinthians. Now, about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know, but the man who loves God is known by God. The real importance, the real key is the excitement we should have at being known fully by our Master, by our Creator. All right. The big dog. And the big dogs, now these three remain. And it means they stay put. They're continuing. Faith, hope, love. Again, faith, there is no salvation without it. Placing our trust in the completed work of Jesus Christ. Not in any of our own labors or works, but in that. Faith, hope. That concrete, remember this is not hope in the English-speaking America. Oh, I hope I win the lottery. That's not biblical hope. Biblical hope is grounded rock solid in time and space history. And it's looking forward to a conclusion that has been promised. In Titus, talks about that blessed hope that we have. And it goes on to refer. What is the blessed hope? Well, it's that Jesus is coming back. And he's going to take us home. That's a blessed hope. So this is faith, hope, and love. And he's already just given us the reasoning for that. But the greatest of these is love. Okay. I want to read a little more fully this part, just 3 verses of it. Therefore, as God's chosen people, this is in verse 12, Colossians 3. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And finally, one that you've heard over and over and over and over, and tough, why don't you just go ahead and memorize it if you haven't, because you just hear it again. Okay? Jesus speaking with the disciples, John's Gospel, chapter 13. Okay? For as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Okay? Remember? And he goes on to say that by this, everyone will know you're my disciples if you love one another. It's a verb. It's an action. And if you do it, I mean, that's a huge promise. That's the biggest thing. You want to talk about what would make us more effective in sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ? You don't have to have the spiritual gift of evangelism. All of us are supposed to be sharing truth, loving folks and sharing truth. The biggest improvement, the greatest impetus that we can give to people hearing the gospel, whether they respond or not, it's between them and the living God. But being able to hear it, loving one another, that's the greatest aid that we can give to the message being heard and taken seriously. Agape love is as agape love does. We can talk it, but if we're doing it, boy, that's going to give a validity to the message of Jesus Christ that nothing else on the planet does. There was a phrase back in the dark ages when I was down at UT. If you can't run with the big dogs, of course, and the tracksters, the runners, they loved it. If you can't run with the big dogs, stay on the porch. Well, if the big dogs are faith, hope, and love, the biggest of the big dogs is love. And I don't think we should be staying on the porch at all. We need to go run with the big dog. It is as it does. Let's pray. Father, please forgive us for the way we fall short, and we do. We understand that. But we want to stay in the fight. We want to stay in the battle. We want to stay in the relationship with you first and with one another and with the world around us. And we want to love well. Please make that part of our life. Build it into us. Increase it a little bit every day so that our love is greater for you and for others, and so that people can get a glimpse of who you are and what you're like through us. And we ask it, please bring glory to yourself through your people in Jesus' name.